Denise arrived early the next morning, even before the janitorial crew had clocked in. Old habits didn't die quickly. She walked the halls with that same quiet rhythm in her steps, but now with keycard that beeped on doors she was never meant to open. She didn't head to the supply room. She walked past it, barely glancing in. Something about that moment felt like shedding skin, not because she was leaving behind who she used to be, but because she had finally been allowed to carry it with her into the next chapter. She reached her new office, the one with real blinds and real desk. And before she sat down, she opened the bottom drawer. The janitor uniform, neatly folded, still sat there like photograph from life no one ever asked about. She touched it once, then she closed the drawer and turned on her computer. Her email was full already, messages from teams across departments, people she had never spoken to but who now wanted a piece of her time. Polite, some frankly weren't. Few didn't bother hiding their tone. Since you're new to this environment, let's discuss some expectations. One read, another. Please loop in someone with international experience. She chuckled. 9 languages apparently didn't count. At 9:03 a.m., her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered anyway. It is Atwater, the voice said. Yes, this is Dario from Sao Paulo. Kellerman said you might be helping us with the contract translation issues. She straightened. Yes, I received the documents last night. There are discrepancies in Articles 4 and 7, primarily in terminology between Brazilian Portuguese and the English summary. It's creating confusion on deliverables. There was pause, then, voce fala Portuguese. She smiled, fluentement. Another pause, then laughed. We've been waiting months for this. So have I, she said quietly. After the call, she spent the rest of the morning reviewing international memos and training documentation so riddled with translation errors. She wondered how anything had gotten done at all. Numbers were clean, but language was messy. It always had been, and when no one knows how to listen, things break. She fixed what she could, flagged what she couldn't, rewrote what was salvageable. Around noon, she walked into the cafeteria, something she had never done in daylight hours before. It was packed with people who had walked past her for years. Some looked away, some stared. One young guy stood up and offered her a seat. That was new. She declined and walked to the far end of the room with her tray. Sat alone. She didn't expect anyone to join. She wasn't here to make friends, but as she took bite of her sandwich, someone slid into the chair. From her, Kellerman, no fanfare. Just a man in a rolled-up dress shirt with a coffee cup and that same look of curiosity he'd had the first day. He heard her speak Mandarin. How's it going? He asked. Busy, she said. The Sao Paulo issue wasn't just language gap. It was trust. They didn't believe we understood their culture, so they stopped sharing important updates. And now they're listening again. As they feel heard. He nodded, stirring his coffee. I'm not sure why we never thought to create this role sooner. She looked at him. Because you weren't looking in the right places. That landed heavier than either of them expected. He let it sit for a moment. The board's meeting next month. I want you to present what you've been doing. She didn't answer right away. You think they're ready for that? Well, I think they need to be. She nodded once, finished her sandwich. I'll prepare something. He stood good, then added, you belong here, Denise. And not just because I say so. You're already proving it. After he left, she sat there for a while watching the cafeteria churn with its usual noise and chatter. People passed by her table like she was ghost in the middle of festival. And yet her presence shifted the air. Whether they wanted it or not, they knew she was here now. And not going anywhere. That afternoon, Victor stopped by her office again. He still didn't knock. Got meeting with the German partners tomorrow, he said. We'll meet you in there. I speak German, she replied. I know, he said. I read your file. She looked up. That's new. He didn't smile. They're expecting the usual stiff translation, some polite nodding. I figure you'll surprise them. That tends to happen, she said. He handed her the briefing documents, turned, then paused at the door. You shook things up. Not everyone's happy. Are you? She asked. He didn't answer, just left. The next day, the meeting with the German partners went exactly as she expected. They were formal, reserved, slightly skeptical, until she began speaking. Not just in fluent German, but in their specific dialect, using industry-specific phrasing that most native speakers didn't bother learning unless they had lived it. The tension in the room melted. Conversations flowed. Contracts moved forward, and when the meeting ended, one of the German delegates took her hand in both of his and said, This is the first time we've truly understood each other. She didn't tear up. She'd cried enough in her life behind closed doors, in empty supply closets, in the car before picking up her daughter from school. But inside, something shifted. It felt like the gears of a long broken clock turning again. As she walked back to her office, someone from finance stopped her in the hallway, a middle-aged woman named Barbara who she'd seen before but never spoken to. "I heard what you did with the Germans," she said. "That was impressive." Denise smiled, "Thanks. And I just wanted to say, I used to be receptionist 15 years ago." Sometimes you forget what you're capable of until someone like you reminds you. Denise didn't know what to say to that, so she just nodded. That evening, as she was packing up, she found another note on her desk. Different handwriting, no name, just, "You remind us what's possible." She didn't cry, but her hands lingered on the paper longer than necessary. Back at home, she called her daughter, now nurse living 2 states over. "How's the job?" her daughter asked fast. Denise said loud, "Good. You sleeping?" "More than I used to." "You okay?" Denise paused. I think I'm becoming okay." They talked about small things. Groceries, the dog new series on Netflix. But when they hung up, Denise sat in silence, staring out at the street. The world outside hadn't changed, the sidewalk still cracked, the neighbors still too loud. But inside her, something was rebuilding, not from scratch, from memory, from resilience, from every quiet moment she was told didn't count, and now for the first time it did. Denise arrived at the office on Thursday before the sun had cleared the skyline, long before the emails and elevator dings the building. She liked the quiet before the current pulled everyone into their own tides. She used to clean these hallways in silence, and now she walked them with purpose. But that silence still followed her like coats she hadn't opposed. Tea fully taken off, her badge beeped at the new door, and the lock gave way with soft click. It was a small thing, but that sound reminded her every time. "The space is yours now." But the truth was, space alone didn't make you safe. As she stepped into her office and turned on the lights, she noticed something she'd seen the day before. Folder had been slipped under her door. Plain manila, no label. She picked it up slowly, the kind of slow you learn when life has taught you to expect the sting first. Inside was a printout of her old employment records, job titles: night custodian, floor technician, sanitation team member, no resume attached, no cover letter, just her years in cleaning jobs circled in red pen, no note, no sender, just message without words. "We remember who you are." She placed the folder on desk carefully, like it might explode if disturbed too quickly, and she sat down, inhaled deeply, and turned to her calendar. Meetings with Morocco's team at 10, document review with legal at 1:30, and request, oddly urgent, for private meeting at 4 p.m. with names she hadn't seen before. Aline or Craig. She Googled it. Board member, Dallas-based. Old guard, the kind of person whose name rarely showed up in email threads unless something serious was being discussed. Denise had never been in the same room as board member. Now one wanted to speak to her alone. She didn't tell anyone. She didn't run to Kellerman. She didn't ask around. She'd lived long enough to know when the storm's coming, you tighten your coat and walk into it. The rest of the day moved fast. The Moroccan team was warm, even eager. When she opened the meeting in Moroccan Arabic, something unspoken passed across the room. Shoulders dropped, arms uncrossed. The conversation flowed like they'd all been waiting for someone to show them they mattered enough to be spoken to properly. Denise didn't pitch or perform. She just listened, rephrased, reframed, translated, yes, but more than that. She connected. By the end of the meeting, a 3-month standstill had turned into a handshake and a verbal commitment to move forward. When the Moroccan delegate touched his heart and said, "No one's ever done that for us," she didn't reply. She just nodded. It was enough. By 3:45 p.m., she was back at her desk rereading the email that confirmed her meeting. Still no context, still no explanation, but she didn't need one. She changed into soft navy blazer. Thrifted last week with the HR stipend, and tied her twists back tighter than usual. Then at 3:58, she walked to the 17th floor. She'd never been to the 17th floor. It felt quieter, colder, the carpet thicker, the air more processed. She knocked on the door marked "Private Conference A." Sharp voice called out, "Come in." Aline or Craig sat at the table like monument, slim, silver-haired, eyes sharp as freshly cut glass. She didn't stand, didn't smile, just gestured to the seat across from her. "Is Atwater," she said, crisp and clinical. "I've reviewed your file." Denise said nothing. She waited. "Do you have no college degree, no formal corporate training, no certifications?" "You've been janitor in this building for 13 years. Aline folded her hands. "Help me understand how someone like you ends up handling high-level international affairs." The insult wasn't even hidden. It didn't need to be. It was dressed in authority. Denise met her gaze. "Because I speak the languages. I understand the cultures. I've already resolved 3 vendor disputes this week and moved stalled partnership forward." "That's anecdotal," Aline said. "You think this company should be run on instinct and charm?" Denise's jaw tightened. Then she spoke slowly, evenly. "I think it should be run on results." Aline blinked. just once. That single blink told Denise more than any argument could. She wasn't used to being challenged, certainly not by someone without pedigree. Your gamble, Alina said. I'm used to that, Denise replied. My whole life has been one. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Alina stood and closed the folder in front of her. We'll be watching. Denise rose too, like nothing less. She left the room without waiting to be dismissed. She walked back to her office like nothing had happened, but inside she was on fire, not with fear, with purpose. She wasn't naive. She knew this wasn't over, but she also knew something else now, something more dangerous than fear. She knew she belonged. That night, after most of the building had gone quiet, she didn't go straight home. She walked the halls she used to clean, her heels clicking against towel in the same rhythm her old mop wheels used to make, stood in the east lobby where she'd first translated for the lost man. She stood by the vending machine where she once cried behind a bag of pretzels after a rough call with the school about her daughter. She stood by the freight elevator, the one only janitors used, and ran her hand along the cool metal. These halls knew her. They'd held her silence, her sweat, her years. Now they would hold her voice. When she finally made it home, she sat by her kitchen window again. Same street light, same sidewalk, but something had changed. She reached for her phone and texted her daughter. I had tough meeting today. Her daughter replied instantly. You okay? Denise stared at the screen, then typed, yeah, I didn't back down. A pause, then, that's my mama. She smiled, but it wasn't pride that moved her. It was clarity. She wasn't just fighting for her job. She was fighting to redefine what a person like her could be. Not symbol, not charity case, professional leader. A voice in the room who earned her chair and would keep it, no matter how many red circles they drew on her past. The next morning, Denise didn't enter the building through the front. She took the side entrance near the loading dock, the one she'd used for 13 years. Not out of habit. Out of intention. There was something grounding about that walk through the back hallways, past the yellow mop buckets and boxes of printer paper, past the chipped linoleum tiles and the bulletin board where staff birthdays were still pinned up months after they passed. It reminded her of something she refused to forget. Where she started didn't make her small, it made her steady. When she reached the main floor, the buzz hit her instantly. People weren't whispering anymore. They were flat out talking. She heard her name as she passed the elevators, heard promotion to Kellerman, 9 languages, and even absurdly undercover agent. She didn't flinch. Let them talk. Truth has a way of catching up to gossip. She got office and found memo taped to her door. Not from HR, not from Kellerman. Just a scrawled note in red ink. Still watching. No name, no signature, just more shadow threats from someone who thought paper could keep her in place. She peeled it off calmly, folded it in half, and dropped it into the recycling bin. Then she turned on her monitor and got to work. She had video call with the Dubai partners in 30 minutes and lunch meeting with the Diversity and Inclusion Committee at noon. Funny, she thought, week ago they didn't even her name. Now they wanted her insight. At 9:59, she logged into the Dubai call and opened in Arabic, smooth and direct. The men on the screen blinked in surprise, then leaned forward, speaking faster, more openly, more personally. They discussed contracts, cultural misunderstandings, and ways to rebuild the timeline. By the end, the lead delegate said, this is the first time we felt like partners, not just vendors. She responded simply, that's the goal. She didn't smile. She didn't, too. The work spoke. After the call ended, she took a moment, stared at the screen, and let the silence land. The old Denise might have doubted herself after every meeting, replayed her words, dissected her tone, but not anymore. Not today. The lunch meeting was less productive. Half the people around the table had clearly been told to be there. They smiled too wide, nodded too hard. When she suggested cross-training programs for non-office staff, so janitors and maintenance workers could access language classes or leadership coaching. Marketing manager smirked, said, whoa, that's ambitious. Denise looked him in the eye and replied, so was the idea of me being in this job. And yet, here we are. The room went quiet. Someone coughed. Someone else scribbled on notepad that was clearly blank, but one woman, older from accounting, leaned in and said, it's not ambitious. It's overdue. That was all Denise needed. One ally in the room is enough to push the needle. After lunch, she returned to her office to find sealed envelope on her desk, no label. Inside was note, handwritten in tight, slanted print. I used to think I'd be invisible forever. Today I stood a little taller because of you. Thank you. No signature. No return address. But Denise sat back in her chair and let the words sink in. She wasn't just translating languages anymore. She was translating value. Across every level of the building, that afternoon Kellerman stopped by. He didn't knock, just leaned against the doorframe, holding coffee cup like it was his last line of defense. I heard about the lunch meeting, he said. Some of those folks don't exactly embrace new ideas. She tilted her head. They don't have to. The ideas will move without them. He smiled at that. I was thinking, he said. You ever consider speaking at the summit next month? Logistics Leadership Conference. Cincinnati. They want janitor on stage. She asked. His face didn't change. They want leader. And if they don't know it yet, they will by the end of your talk. She didn't answer right away. She looked at the window. The city stretched beyond it. Streets she'd walked to single mother stores she used to shop at with coupons and prayers. She thought of the people still working on the floors below, the ones who'd never had anyone knock on their potential. If I go, she said slowly, I don't want to give motivational speech. Good, he said. Give truthful one. That night she took the long way home, drove past her old neighborhood, the corner store where she once begged the clerk to let her buy diapers on store credit, the library where she'd borrowed foreign newspapers just to keep her mind sharp, the gas station where her card had been declined more times than she could count. Every street was chapter. Every crack in the sidewalk sentence. Her past wasn't chain, it was ladder. At home, she sat down with a yellow notepad and began drafting her speech. Not with quotes or platitudes, with facts, with the exact moment someone had finally asked her what she could do, with the way that simple act, attention, not charity, had unspooled future no one had seen coming. She wrote slowly, deliberately, crossing out every sentence that sounded like it was designed to impress. This wasn't about applause, it was about awakening, and somewhere deep in the night, she wrote one line that stopped her cold. She stared at it for a long time, then underlined it twice. I was never just janitor. I was ready. You just didn't look long enough to see it. She didn't know yet that this line would become a quote that would echo in the mouths of strangers for years, that it would be printed on HR flyers and written on whiteboards by interns trying to remember why they came to work. All she knew was that it was true. And when you speak the truth clearly, even those who don't want to hear it can't help but recognize the sound. The next day, Aline or Craig called another meeting. No folder this time. No veiled insults. Just tight-lipped nod as Denise walked in. I've been reviewing your Dubai notes, Aline said. Impressive work. Denise didn't respond. She let the silence widen until Aline filled it. You're shaking the system. It needed shaking, Denise replied. Aline exhaled slowly, then said something she hadn't said before. You're not what I expected, but most of us aren't, Denise said. And she stood, not waiting for a dismissal, and Aline didn't stop her. In fact, she watched her leave like someone watching tide they can't hold back anymore. Denise didn't feel triumphant. She felt ready, because there were still rooms to walk into, still voices to raise, still stories to rewrite. And now she wasn't doing it for herself alone. She was doing it for every name badge never read, every uniform never seen, every janitor who spoke fluently, not just in language, but in potential, and the world was finally starting to listen. On Monday morning, Denise's nameplate had been bolted to the wall outside her office in brushed steel letters, the kind that didn't peel or fade. It was the first time in her life her name had been printed on anything that didn't end with custodial shift schedule or maintenance assignment list. But she didn't linger outside her door to admire it. She didn't even pause. There was too much to do, and too many eyes waiting to see if she'd fall flat now that it was dry. Beside her desk was stacked with updates. Emails from the Paris team, onboarding packets from Argentina, draft press release about new partnership in South Korea that someone had just realized needed better cultural review before launch. The HR team had even sent over a set of corporate templates for presentations, all neatly labeled and ready for input. She opened the file, scrolled through the sterile fonts and gray-blue backgrounds, and closed it just as quickly. She wouldn't be any of that. She had her own voice, and now she had the authority to use it. The day didn't pause for pleasantries. At 9 sharp, she was in room with Victor and few department heads preparing for the arrival of Moroccan delegation set to arrive that Wednesday. Month ago, this expansion deal had been all but dead. Now it was alive again. Barely. They've agreed to face, Victor muttered, flipping through his notes. But they're still hesitant. They don't trust our intent. Would you? Inez said. The room turned toward her. We approached them like transaction. They wanted partnership. There's difference. Victor said nothing, but his jaw worked tightly. Inez leaned forward, her voice calm. We don't fix this with strategy decks or catered lunches. We fix it by treating them like humans, not hurdles. The room was quiet. Finally, one of the younger managers nodded. What do you suggest? We speak to them in their own tongue. We show we listened. I'll lead the conversation. No translators, just people. And just like that, janitor was now quarterbacking cross-continental deal worth 7 figures. By lunch, the whispers had evolved. It was no longer, how did she get that job? But did you hear what she said in the meeting? Not all of it was admiration, of course. Some were confused. Others were threatened. But she'd lived long enough to know that when you push system that's never made room for you, the creaks and groans aren't sign you're breaking it. They're proof that it's finally moving. After lunch, she made time to visit the lower floors. Not out of nostalgia, but because she knew who lived down there, who worked in the shadows that made the lights upstairs possible. The janitorial team was taking their break in the small windowless room near the freight elevator. Denise knocked once, then walked in. A few heads turned. One man dropped his sandwich. Someone mumbled, "Oh, wow, hey," she said, offering small wave. "I just wanted to stop by." A woman in her 50s, Ramona, who'd trained Denise her first week all those years ago, stood up, wiping her hands. "They really gave you an office?" Denise grinned. "Yeah, with door and everything." Ramona laughed, and that broke the tension. "Good," she said. "About damn time they noticed what you can do." "Took 'em while," Denise replied. "But now that they're watching, I figured they ought to watch all of us." She reached into her bag and handed Ramona a small stack of printed flyers. On them was drafted a new program she'd been building with Kellerman, Voice Inside, an initiative designed to identify untapped talent among non-desk workers. It included access to language courses, mentorship sessions, skill audits, and paths toward lateral growth in departments most workers never even saw. "This isn't official yet," Denise said, "but it will be soon. I want you all to be the first to know." One of the janitors, younger guy named Terrell, spoke up. "Wait, this is for us." "Yes," said, "it starts with us." When she left the break room, someone had written, "We see you too," in marker on the whiteboard. She didn't need to know who. She carried those words with her the rest of the day like armor. That afternoon, she met with Kellerman to finalize the upcoming summit details. "You sure you want to speak?" he asked. "It'll be recorded, streamed live." "Some of these people, they're old school." "So am I," she said. "Well, I just got new clothes." He chuckled. "You've got guts." "No," she replied. "I've got receipts." The day ended late. She stayed after hours reviewing contracts in Korean and fielding an impromptu call from the Italian office. When she finally shut down her monitor, it was after 9. As she gathered her things, she heard knock. She looked up to see man in delivery uniform. One of the nighttime crews she used to overlap with on cleaning shifts. He helped. "Hey, Kopek." "Someone ordered from the Thai place." She shook her head. "Not me." He checked the receipt. "No name, just says for Denise. You never ate lunch." Her eyebrows rose. "Who sent this?" He shrugged. "No idea. Said it was paid for in cash." She took the bag, thanked him, and closed the door. She sat down, opened the container, and found a note tucked inside. 3 words scribbled on a napkin. "Keep climbing, we're watching." For the first time all day, she sat back and let herself feel it, not just the exhaustion or the momentum, but the wave building underneath. She wasn't just doing her job. She was becoming symbol whether she wanted to or not, but she wasn't afraid of it. She'd spent her life building strength in silence. Now the silence was giving way to something louder, something irreversible. Later that night, her daughter called. "Ma, I heard you're going to be on live stream next month." Denise blinked. "Who told you that?" "The internet, Ma. People talk. I'm proud of you. You always were. Still, this is big. You ready?" Denise looked out the window at the city glowing faintly beneath the stars. "No," she said. "But I'm not backing down." And in the silence that followed, something sacred passed between them, between generations, between stories, between all the versions of Denise that had led her to this moment: the janitor, the mother, the fighter, the translator, the bridge. She was all of them still. And now the world was finally learning how to listen. The logistics summit in Cincinnati didn't feel like summit when Denise first arrived. It felt like an old boys club conference with new coat of paint. Same double-breasted suits, same jargon-heavy panels, same tired jokes over breakfast buffets. Except now there were a few more banners about inclusion, few more name tags with titles like diversity strategist, and more panel topics promising innovation than anyone in the room was actually ready for. Denise didn't flinch. She had her badge, her schedule, and her name printed right there in the program under keynote speakers sandwiched between 2 men with 10-letter titles and 60-slide PowerPoints. She wasn't there for decoration. She was there to deliver truth with the kind of clarity that made people shift in their seats. Not out of discomfort, but because they couldn't sit with themselves the same way after hearing it. Her speech was scheduled for 11:15. That gave her just over 2 hours to walk the halls, read the room, and feel the pulse of space that hadn't been built with her in mind. She listened to a speaker from a tech logistics firm talk about automation as inclusion. She watched a panel of executives fumble through questions about language access and multicultural messaging without once acknowledging how few actual multilingual professionals sat in their own offices. When it was her turn, she walked onto the stage without slides, without preamble, and without apology. She looked at the sea of suits and pinned conference lanyards, said, "Good morning, I'm Denise Atwater. A few months ago, I was cleaning the baseboards in the building I now help lead. I speak 9 languages." But for 13 years, nobody asked me about any of them, because they saw my uniform before they saw me. That line hit the room like stone dropped in still water, ripple, then silence, then more. She told him about growing up in Toledo, about getting full ride to Kent State, about leaving school to care for her mother and then raising child alone. She told him how for over decades she taught herself languages while scrubbing floors. Portuguese between sweeping shifts, Arabic during night breaks, Swahili after her daughter fell asleep. And then she said the sentence that made someone in the back of the room exhale like they'd been punched. I was never just janitor. I was fluent. I was capable. I was ready. But nobody ever looked long enough to see it. She let that sit, not for drama, but for digestion. Because sometimes the truth is so plain, so deeply human, it takes a moment to settle into the bones. She continued. The next time you walk past someone who doesn't wear a suit, ask yourself what you're really passing by. Talent doesn't always come in LinkedIn profile. Sometimes it's wearing non-slip shoes and pushing mop. Man in the front row blinked hard. Another lowered his head, not in shame necessarily, but in recognition. Because deep down, every man in that room knew someone, maybe cousin, friend, father, or younger version of himself, who had been overlooked for no reason but appearance. She didn't end with quote, didn't wrap it in bow. She closed her speech with challenge. What are you building if you're only building up the people who already have access? If the only voices at your table are the ones who sound like you, then your table isn't leadership. It's mirror, break the mirror, invite someone who doesn't look like you. You might be surprised who's been ready all along. When she walked off stage, the room didn't immediately erupt. There was no clapping on cue. There was something deeper than applause. Stillness, absorption, pause that only truth can command. Then someone stood up, then another. And by the time reached the side door, the entire auditorium was on its feet. Kellerman was waiting backstage. He didn't say anything for a full minute. Then with breath that carried years of blind spots, he said, I don't think we understood how big this could be. But Denise looked at him. It was always big. He just finally saw it. Back at the hotel, her inbox was flooded, not with corporate fluff, with real people. Logistics intern in Seattle, warehouse manager in Kansas City, woman in Detroit who had been in custodial work for 20 years and spoke languages but had never been promoted past shift lead. One message stood out. It was from a young man named Paul. My mother's been janitor since I was born. She speaks Spanish, French, and Tagalog. I used to be embarrassed to tell people. But today I'm proud, as I realized brilliance isn't tied to job titles. It's tied to persistence. Thank you for making me see her. Denise closed her laptop and stared at the wall for a long time. Not because she was overwhelmed, because it confirmed what she already knew. The story wasn't hers anymore. It belonged to everyone who had ever been told they were just something, just cleaner, just receptionist, just temp. The next morning, back at Halberg headquarters, things had shifted. Quietly, permanently, the main training room had been renamed. The old plaque was gone. In its place, brushed metal letters read the Atwater Room. No ceremony, no ribbon cutting, just clear, irreversible fact. Later that week, a group of new interns walked past the door. One whispered to that water manager nearby replied, She's the reason you're here. Denise heard about it secondhand, and when she did, she smiled not because it was flattering, but because it meant the roots were growing. But not everyone was celebrating. A meeting later that week, one executive, older, crisp accent, tight collar, asked her flat out, How do we know you won't become distraction? Denise leaned forward, elbows on the table. Sir, if your biggest concern is that people might pay attention to the person creating results, then you're not worried about distraction. You're worried about disruption. And I'm not here to be quiet. Kellerman didn't interrupt. He just sat back, smiling slightly. Denise didn't wait for reply. She returned to her office, pulled open the drawer where her old janitor badge still sat, and held it in her palm, not as memory, as proof of what it costs to be overlooked, of how heavy the silence gets when no one asks what you're capable of. She looked around her office. The clean desk, the international phone lines, the reports she led, it all felt real, but not surreal. It felt earned. She placed the badge back in the drawer and whispered under her breath, Now we build, because the summit was just the beginning. And she wasn't here to be anyone's exception. She was here to change the standard. The Monday after the summit, Denise walked into Halberg headquarters with different kind of stillness around her, not quiet in the absence of noise sense. Quiet like sky right before the first crack of thunder. Kind of pressure that meant something was about to change again. Word had traveled fast. Not just through logistics channels and industry chatter, but across departments, across city lines, across people who had never met her but had forwarded the video of her speech to friends, coworkers, even their own bosses. The company's internal Slack had exploded over the weekend, and by the time she reached the 12th floor, a fresh post-it was waiting on her door. Your voice cracked something open. Now don't let them close it again. She peeled it off, it into her notebook, and stepped inside. There were a dozen messages waiting for her, legal questions from overseas, scheduling conflicts for the new training series she'd proposed in brief, but tense. Email from one board member asking whether she was now positioning herself as brand instead of an employee. She didn't respond to that one, not yet, because brand or not, she was getting work done, and the results were too visible to ignore. At 10 a.m., Kellerman called her in. He didn't waste time. Denise, I want to scale a voice inside, take it beyond Halberg, and make it national model. Partner with other companies in logistics, maybe even cross-industry. You think it's doable? Denise stared at him. You're talking about turning an internal pilot into multi-company framework. Exactly. Template, replicable structure. You already built the bones. I'll give you whatever support you need. But I want you leading it. She leaned back in the chair, not because she doubted herself. She had moved past that, but because she needed a second to let the scope of it land. All right, she said, but it starts here. I want full audits of our own departments. I want the janitors, the cafeteria workers, the warehouse clerks. I want to meet with them, not in HR rooms, in their spaces. I want to hear what they haven't been able to say for years. Do you want stories? He said. No, she corrected. I want truth. Stories come later. Within 3 days, she'd visited 4 regional offices. An Austin Korean-American cafeteria worker named Sun showed her journal filled with half-written business plans he'd never shown anyone. In Denver, a Haitian-born maintenance man named Mark gave her a crash course in how supply chains in his home country could teach them more about resilience than any Ivy League case study. In Jacksonville, she met a woman named Lydia who ran a 3-language Bible study out of the employee break room every Friday after her night shift. These were not charity cases. These were minds, engines, whole ecosystems of intelligence that no one had been trained to recognize because they didn't come wrapped in resumes or degrees or country club accents. Denise didn't document them in spreadsheets. She wrote their names in a black leather notebook under a column labeled "Seen," but not everyone was cheering. In New York, Senior Operations Director pulled her aside after presentation. Look, I support what you're doing, he began, his voice coated in HR-safe neutrality. But some people are starting to feel displaced, like they've worked hard for years, and now someone else is being fast-tracked past them because it's politically popular. Tilted her head. You mean someone like me? He hesitated. That's not what I said, but it's what you meant. He raised his hands. I'm just saying. People are asking, where does this stop? Denise didn't blink. It stops when ability is no longer ignored. It stops when fluency, discipline, and life experience are given the same weight as boardroom polish. He looked like he wanted to argue, but he didn't, because deep down he knew this wasn't fad, this was reckoning. That same week, something unexpected happened. Denise's daughter, Ava, showed up at Halberg unannounced, holding small container of homemade gumbo and nervous smile. You'd eaten much last time we talked, Ava said. So, I figured, maybe you'd like lunch. Denise stood there in the hallway for a second, too stunned to speak. Her daughter had grown into a woman so strong, so sure, nurse, leader in her own right. And now she stood here offering comfort to the mother who had once worked 3 jobs to buy her textbooks. They sat in Denise's office and ate in near silence. Then Ava looked around the room and said, Do you ever think this would happen? Denise shook her head. Not like this, not this late. Ava smiled. It's not late, Ma, you're right on time. The world just took a while to catch up. Denise swallowed hard. You okay with all this? Ava shrugged. I'm not surprised. You've always been this person. They're just finally seeing it. That night, Denise stayed late. The building emptied out, lights dimmed, but she sat at her desk drafting the first version of what would become the National. Voice inside the blueprint. She didn't write it like mission statement. She wrote it like promise, structure that any company could follow, steps to identify overlooked potential, methods to listen without condescension. Metrics that measured more than revenue, measured connection, fluency, contribution, and on the cover, she placed one line in bold. Talent has no dress code. The next morning, quiet announcement went out company-wide. The Atwater Room had officially been designated as the central training and mentorship space for all new hires. Denise's name was now institutional. Not a symbol of diversity, but as model of what was possible. By Friday, she received an invitation from the Department of Labor. They wanted her input on developing federal pilot program to build internal mobility among service workers. And as she read the email, her hands didn't tremble, her voice didn't catch, because she knew now. This was no longer about one woman climbing ladder. This was about rebuilding the ladder from the ground up. That evening, she walked through the building one last time before heading out. She paused in the east lobby, the same spot where, not so long ago, she'd spoken Mandarin to lost visitor and triggered sequence that nobody could have seen coming. She stood there, eyes closed, breathing in the silence. and she remembered not just what she had endured, but what she had carried, what she had refused to put down. When she opened her eyes, a young intern was standing nearby, unsure whether to speak. Denise smiled. "You need something?" But the girl fumbled. I watched your keynote twice. I've never felt like someone talked to us like that. I just wanted to say thank you." But Denise nodded. "Don't thank me yet," she said. "Take the mic when it's your turn. And when you do, don't forget who's still waiting to be seen." The girl smiled and walked off. Denise looked around the lobby one last time, then turned toward the exit. She didn't need the badge anymore. She didn't need the applause. What she needed was already in motion. Wave shift, new way forward, and she was just getting started.